Do you have shoulder pain? These are two types of shoulder impingement I commonly see with my clients. Hi, I'm Alex Zephyr, founder of Resilient Training and Rehab, and I've helped thousands of coaches and clinicians from around the world get more consistent results with their clients. Let's get into it. So before we go into exercises in order to improve the shoulder pain, it's important to understand the different types of hip impingement, the mechanics behind it, and an assessment you can use to identify what kind of impingement you have so that we can further prescribe the right exercise at the right time. First type of hip impingement that's really common is pain in the front of the shoulder. And this usually happens because there's a limitation in shoulder flexion and internal rotation. And so one of the measurements I really like to do is something called a Hawkins-Kennedy, which essentially you bring your shoulder over, or you bring your hand over across your shoulder, and then you lift up. So what this will do is this is shoulder flexion to 90. You get this adduction, so basically just means that the shoulder or the arm is moving towards your body. And then by grabbing onto the other shoulder, that's going to require even more internal rotation, and then you're lifting the elbow up. By lifting the elbow up, you can see how this humerus or the shoulder has to internally rotate. And oftentimes, some people will get a pinch just as they're getting into this position, or especially they'll start to get a pinch as they're lifting up, okay? So one of the reasons why that happens is we're missing the space in the front of the chest. So we're missing that internal rotation, which just means that this sternum and the humerus are moving towards each other. And so when that space gets closer together, we start to reduce the space in the front of the shoulder to allow for internal rotation to happen. So what we commonly see with these kind of people is they commonly have this rounded shoulder position, or they could have a really squeezed shoulder blade. Both of these are going to restrict the amount of internal rotation I can do at the shoulder. But most commonly, you're going to see these people who have a rounded shoulder. As we talked about in previous videos, this rounded shoulder is a compensation for a lack of internal rotation. So if we have somebody who is missing the internal rotation with a shoulder flexed position, and they start to get pinching the front of the shoulder, one of the biggest things we have to do is open up the space in the front of the chest so that we can put the shoulder in a position to allow us to express that internal rotation. So now let's talk about an exercise we can do in order to improve that chest space. So improve the space between the sternum and the humerus. Now, a lot of times when people experience this type of discomfort in front of their shoulder, they can commonly experience it with doing bench press or any type of push-up, because again, that's going to be in that 90-degree range of shoulder flexion, and it's going to require us to internally rotate just to get into those positions. So this is an exercise that I've used a lot with my clients in order to start to open that space up. I include it as a warm-up, or if they're in the acute phases of that shoulder impingement, then maybe I'll include it as part of a accessory movement they could do within their strength program with modified exercises such as pressing in order to further reinforce it. So what we're going to do to set up is you're going to sit down on the ground, and I like to have people flex their ankles. So they're going to dig their heels into the ground. The reason why I like to do that is because that's going to kick on their hamstrings, which is going to bring their pelvis underneath them. So it's stacking their body a little bit more. Versus if I have my feet down, a lot of people start to lean forward and start to arch through their lower rib cage. And that's not what I want. I really want the shoulder, rib cage, and pelvis to be lined up with each other, not the rib cage going forward or the pelvis dumping forward. So get them to dig their heels into the ground, not dragging, just pressing into the ground. Have their hands beside their pocket out towards the side. And then what I'm going to get them to do is they're going to push up as though they're pushing their body off the ground. What I don't want you to do is squeeze your shoulder blades together, because again, that's going to flare your ribs. Instead, you're going to get nice and tall through your shoulders as though you're thinking about bringing your shoulders away from your ears. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take a big breath into your nose, feel your chest expand. As you breathe out, you're going to press your hands into the ground, dig your heels into the ground. Take a big breath into your nose, feel the chest expand. As you exhale, press your hands, press your heels. Now, what a lot of people will do is they will look down to the ground, look down to the feet. I actually want you to look up towards the ceiling just a little bit, because that is going to further open up the chest, because all these neck muscles attach right to the top of the sternum, right to close to where the collarbone meets the sternum. And so I really want that to just be further opening up that chest. So again, breathe in as you breathe in this position, really fill your chest with air. Breathe out, push into the ground with both your feet and your hands. And you do about 2 sets of about 8 breaths. The second type of shoulder impingement that I commonly see is when we get to these end ranges of shoulder flexion. So let's just say that we improved this Hawkins-Kennedy and they get to about 120 degrees of shoulder flexion or above, and they start to feel the pinch in the front of their shoulder. Then we're starting to look at this upper part of the rib cage and lower part of the spine are the areas that are compressed and tense. And so they can get that shoulder flexion, but once they get to about 120 degrees, they start to feel the pinching because this space isn't able to open. Okay, so once I get past the 120 degrees of shoulder flexion, what should happen is this top part of the scapula should actually be tilting backwards because this upper back starts to shift back into it. There's only 120 degrees of shoulder flexion in the actual humerus, in the actual joint. Everything above that has to come from up here. And so what needs to happen is these scales of the spine actually need to rotate away from the scapula to create that space in order to get into those end ranges of shoulder flexion. But with these people, this space is squeezed and the scapula is close towards the spine. So now that space isn't open and they get into that pinchy range at the top. And so our objective needs to be to open up this end range shoulder flexion. And one of the tests that we can determine in order to identify if this is the case is doing just an overhead shoulder flexion and identifying, okay, well, at 120 degrees of shoulder flexion, this is when they feel the impingement. We make a note of that, and now our objective is to restore end range shoulder flexion for those people. Before we get to the exercise, if you found this perspective helpful or just want to dive deeper into concepts like this, I offer a 9-week biomechanics mentorship called the Evolve Mentorship, where we take case studies. We also break down these different types of pain or these different types of compensations into a further level based on assessment so that we can select the right exercise at the right time in order to overcome. So if you're looking at evolving your understanding of the body, then click the link below and sign up for our next cohort of our Evolve Biomechanics Mentorship. Let's get into the exercise. So in order to train this overhead shoulder flexion, there's a couple key things we have to think about. First, inverting the body. That means just bending over so the hips are a little bit higher than the head, or just by bending over slightly, that's going to create more of this expansion in the upper part of our rib cage. The other thing we need to think about doing is creating some type of rotation. As I mentioned, the spine and the scapula need to be moving away from each other, and one of the ways that we can do that is by rotating our rib cage. That is why doing alternating activities are going to be very good at creating that space. And the other thing is doing a little bit of starting in a high reaching position to a low reaching position. That really helps create that rotation so I can create that separation between the spine and the scapula. This is why I really like using this alternating pull down activity. And by shifting my hips or by having my left foot slightly back towards compared to my right side, I can get that further rotation towards the left. So let's assume that somebody has pain in that end range shoulder flexion on the left side, pulling down the left arm, holding that position as I inhale. So I'm going to exhale as I pull down, inhale, hold the position, exhale as I come back up. That inhale is going to cause my body to rotate towards the left. I can further reinforce this by just even turning my head towards the left as I pull down. Because if I turn my head to the left, then all of those scales of the spine are going to face towards the right, which again is going to create that space between the spine and the scapula. So doing that alternating pull down is a great way in order to challenge that end range shoulder flexion in a passive way because the cable is going to create that traction, but also by creating the thoracic rotation, it's going to help it even more. So what I get people to do is keep the weight on the back heel of the left, keep the weight on the inside arch of the right. And as they pull down, they're gonna pull down just in front of their thigh, hold the position, inhale as they reach down towards the ground with the left shoulder, exhale as they come up. And you can just do it on the one side, but I do like to do the alternating. But even as the right arm is pulling down, I want you to stay heavy into that left heel to just further create that rotation towards the left. You're gonna do about 2 sets of 8 reps, again, really emphasizing the breath, exhaling, pulling down, inhaling, hold, exhaling as you come up. So when it comes to shoulder pain, it's important to use certain types of assessment measurements to determine what is causing that shoulder pain, to get at the root cause of that shoulder pain, because depending on where you start to experience the tension, depending on the assessment, that is going to determine the route in which we are going to do in order to select the right exercise to overcome it. Now, although I'm talking about pain, the same principles are going to apply with somebody who doesn't feel pain and wants to improve shoulder mobility. So if you rewatch this video and disregard the concept of pain and just thinking about shoulder mobility as a whole, the same principles are going to apply to improve shoulder mobility and reduce tension. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.